think there's so many overlaps with birth and death, really. The passages of life. But as a doula, I see so much overlap in how we show up for someone after birth, show up for them after death or a big loss or grief. And I think there's a lot of awkwardness. Sometimes we can stand back and not know what to do or say, or feel like we're treading on toes, or do they really want?
Yeah, it's like that fear of doing the wrong thing makes us do nothing. Hello everyone and welcome back to No Place Like Home. I'm here with Larissa as per, and we also have the wonderful Imren with us today.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. So Imren is one of our care specialists here at home, and you have so much to offer. So why don't we start by talking about your qualifications?
Yes, thank you for having me. Where do I start? Firstly, I'm a mum. I'm
Biggest
not just
qualification
that.
of all.
Yeah, which is a big part of where I am now. So I've got two beautiful boys, 5.5 and 2.5, and I've also got two in the rainbow babies also, which have shaped who I am and really shaped being a postpartum doula. Yeah.
There's always something there that shapes us for doulaing, isn't it?
Absolutely. So definitely my experience with birth, but also pregnancy, birth and being a mum. Prior to that, long. I'll try and keep that one short. But I studied youth work and very naively thought I just want to help people. And I was a young person myself, graduated 21 and started working with quite a high need area, like quite complex. Right. So some of the young people were older than me and like to point it out as well, which is, it's up to the age of 24, 25 that we deem young. So, yeah, that was a big eye-opener.
And that was in youth work.
Yeah.
So you graduated. What was that course that you did to graduate?
I studied social science.
Social science.
Yeah.
Okay,
So a lot around sociology, family studies,
Right.
youth studies, which I love.
Mm.
Really wanted to do psychology and I didn't think I had the smarts for it. So
I would beg to differ, but
maybe when I'm 50, I keep saying psychotherapy, but when the kids are old enough, I don't know. That's where I started, and I landed well. Loved working with young people, and so I did a lot of that, and then that took me through, like I said, quite complex circumstances in people's family dynamics. And supporting a lot of young people through school, particularly high school, who had lots of stuff going on and trying to advocate and support them in the education system.
Right.
And so I went back and studied education going, I'm going to change this up. And then, naively again, I learnt that that's not really my gig. So I went back and studied secondary teaching with student wellbeing as the major there.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's taken me into all sorts of work.
Right.
And then like social planning and that strategy, like big picture.
Okay.
Big picture planning. Yeah, I felt really burnt out where I just lost all perspective on the balance of life. So I stepped out of direct work and then went into doing more of that planning, supporting schools and then that strategic kind of work. So that's
And you did that like within a big corporate or government space or?
Yeah, I've worked a lot in local government. I've worked for NGOs, for private as well, like not private schools but independent schools.
Independent schools, yeah.
Also in the tertiary education, which was awesome. Loved that. Teaching future youth workers and community development workers and teaching counselling, that was
Oh, wow.
Really amazing work. And it's been great then bumping into some of my students afterwards that are now in the sector, and which I didn't get really when I worked with people one-on-one, in that support. Sometimes, there would be a lot there and I just never knew where they landed years later, sometimes, but not always. So it was really beautiful to then see, some of the students out in the world coming back and telling me how valuable those really awkward counselling classes were and how much they got out of it now, that's what I've done in the past. And my doula work. So once I was pregnant with my first, but also, I went on to study after my second was born.
Yeah.
Because I realised that love of just absorbing everything I possibly could just wasn't, going away.
So what did you study?
I studied with the newborn mothers postpartum doula. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Got you. And that was your doula work.
Yeah.
Okay.
So working, became a mum, became a doula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
such
short.
I don't want to say such a common trajectory because it's actually very uncommon, but for people who are doulas, it's often becoming a mum that then leads us into this type of care work because we see the value for it once we become mothers, whereas often beforehand how can you tell? You just don't know until you've been in it. There's those very special people that see it, before they become mothers or parents themselves, but usually it's that huge transition into motherhood that puts us on the doula trajectory. So tell us about your births and your postpartums and pregnancy,
again,
all of it.
Long story short, hey. So my first, again, like my first was while we were overseas and I had an early birth while we were travelling through Europe and it was, I think, a week in. So that was a big shock to our system. And I really feel like I processed some of it, but I really didn't process all of it until I came back home.
Yeah, you would have wanted to push it down and just try and enjoy Europe, right? And then when you're in the safety of
the
home,
familiarity of being home and my support people, it all came in.
Yeah.
So that was a big shock. It took me quite a bit to work through. Yeah. And then when I fell pregnant with my my eldest, of course I had so much, anxiety around that post experience after pregnancy loss. So that went all smoothly. I think I probably chose my support in pregnancy because of that, thinking, of course, another typical thought around private would give me the best care, and in hindsight, absolutely not. And so I remember walking away from the first appointment with the OB and I'd said to my husband, I just don't think she's for me. And he goes, she knows her stuff. And so I self-doubted, my gut, my intuition was saying, not for you, Imren. And so I went along with it. I went along with that. But there were a lot of times where I just didn't feel really empowered to make a choice. My birth plan was pretty much just put aside and told me like that they never go to plan and they question things I put in it. And so that followed really where I thought I was getting good care because I was in
the private system.
Yeah. Didn't know any different. And, of course, it wasn't the obstetrician that I had that came to my birth. So that as well just threw me. But it was all,
normal,
quite a normal
physiological
pregnancy.
birth, yeah.
And my waters broke, and that's where I just, in hindsight again, I just think if I had a doula with me, it would have been completely different.
I've had many of the same thoughts, yeah.
So I, from a place of fear, I made that decision to stay in the hospital after my waters broke. Rather if I had someone say it's okay, go home, rest as much, you're completely okay, I'll give you a call, we'll touch base and we'll take it from there. Whereas I just went into being quite anxious about what could go wrong, and I knew I wouldn't get any sleep if I went home. So that's where all the interventions started, where I was induced because, I didn't have any contractions. I was induced, and then my contractions were all over the place. I laboured for 24 hours, got to 9 centimetres, and then it was just, the obstetrician would come and go, not there for much of it, but then came in and said, we've got to try something different, and we were still like, what is it? And they said, it's looking like it's going to be a cesarean. And that's shocking me. And the one thing I must say is I turned to her and said, I need a moment with my husband. And I just felt the only part I felt empowered was that I had a choice to say, let's put a pause, and I need to really unpack this a little bit and feel my feelings through it, the shock, before we go into that's what happened. And I remember them saying, let's stay focused on you're going to meet your baby soon. And that brought me to it. And he was born and he was healthy, and I remember he didn't cry for quite a bit. And I was there just screaming out, going, where's my baby? Tell me my baby's fine. And he was. But all that time, as soon after he was taken away, and I kept saying to my husband, can you please be with him? He knows your voice.
Yeah.
Can you please be with him the whole time? So my mum and sister met him while I was in recovery. It's all that I was taken into recovery for quite some time and didn't know there were other options,
Yeah, I know. It's a common
because
story,
you put so much trust
unfortunately.
in the very expensive obstetrician. We don't know what we don't know. That comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have a plan for your postpartum in that pregnancy?
No,
Imren?
not really. I remember a colleague saying, I did the hospital antenatal classes.
Yeah.
And then a colleague had said to me, don't worry about going into the breastfeeding one. You don't really need to.
Oh,
so I skipped that. Yeah. Yeah. And then she said, fill your freezer. And I thought, I've got my mum.
Yeah.
My mum's going to be there.
Yeah.
So, that was no real plan. No.
Yeah.
And I was in shock.
Yeah.
I was in quite a lot of shock after the birth. Again, post-birth, there was a lot of contrary information. I was told he was a big baby, so we need to put him on formula.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and take him into the nursery so you can rest, all these things that – and I had been through a long labour.
This is not –
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was completely exhausted. I really think I was in a disassociated state because I hadn't really taken in what had just happened.
Yeah.
There was so much there. And so I got home with that. And I have so much compassion for that part of me, and it is only 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But I can see how, there were so many parts of me that were just lost in that time. And I remember sitting at home going, how is it that women are just meant to be at home with a baby on their own? How f***ed is this? Like, there's a whole world out there, and I'm sitting on the couch and I haven't been able to get up off the couch, and I can see out the window. There's a whole world out there, and I can't be part of it. Like, there's so much that's just
And
keeping
that's a
me
heavy,
from
that's a heavy thought to hold.
Yeah.
When you're in that vulnerable.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of support from my parents.
Yeah.
God bless them. There was, they were there. My mum had come into our home and cleaned up the mess from my waters breaking and everything, and made the home a home when we got there, and made sure there was food, and would come every day. And so that was the support we had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And then your next birth, next pregnancy?
Yeah, I learnt a lot. I learned a lot and thought, right, I'm doing it different this time.
Yeah, okay.
And though I thought I was informed first time, then I realised how much I didn't know.
Right.
So was there another rainbow baby between?
Yeah, there was. And it was really traumatic. It was a missed miscarriage. So I was 13-week scan that I was told there was no heartbeat.
Oh,
So that was,
yeah.
and in saying that, I fell pregnant 2 months after.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I knew, that wasn't planned. I didn't feel any different I knew I needed time. I know it can be really mixed for women after a loss of whether they want to fall pregnant again and it can be easy to judge. But it's so individual about what happens to your body and how you feel. And every pregnant, every time I'd get a bleed, there'd be this whole grief process.
Yeah.
So there was a rainbow baby in between.
Yeah.
And then, that was really traumatic. I won't go into all of that, but I had a really traumatic experience with the public hospital system through COVID with that loss because I'd hemorrhaged and then had to be hospitalised for 2 nights on my own with no visitors so I could get an ultrasound to find out what needed to happen.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessary that I needed to be, and I couldn't leave just in case it was high risk of hemorrhaging again. So that was unnecessary. I realised after that didn't need to happen.
Yeah.
So when I fell pregnant with my youngest, there was a lot of anxiety around
I bet.
that pregnancy and potentially another loss. And also I'd say that pregnancy was healthy, but during that time I also, at about 16 weeks, I found out that through my eldest, long story, but that we had a genetic condition. And so that put me in a high risk with my pregnancy and risk of blood clotting or stroke. And then,
What was that, Imren, if you don't mind?
It's called CMAVM. So it affects the capillaries and arteries.
Right.
Just a freak instance that I was born with it.
Wow.
Not through my lineage. Yeah.
Okay.
And so then we had my son tested. So he had it. That's where
Right.
that was the instigator of finding out that I've got it, which I didn't know my whole life. But that meant that I needed to have CT scans and MRIs during my pregnancy, and being told that, if there's a risk of anything happening, that we might need to terminate.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
Yes. So that was, and I still hold, that guilt around, I still hold that guilt of having CT scan at that time. And, they give you your risk, but what other option do you have when they tell you, well, everything's risk, I used to say, like, choose this pile of or this pile of
the less of two evils.
Sorry. Yeah. So,
definitely.
So then that meant I did so much research. I informed myself so much, knew I wanted a different care second time round, and went along with having a private midwife, which was amazing. But that meant that because it was through the public system, I needed to also be in their high risk and see the obstetrician through there, which was quite okay. But toward the end of the pregnancy, they were all, quite risk averse. But it was amazing that I had my private midwife who kept things balanced, who would bring me back.
Did you feel like you could advocate more for yourself that time round, Imren? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd do a lot of calling my midwife after every appointment in tears, saying, "Oh, they've given me this stat. Oh, they're saying this could happen, or I might need to be induced, or I might," and she would calm me down, talk me through the stats, flip the stats, and then say, "We've got an option here. How we could push it back. What do you want to do?" So we actually did. I went at 40 plus 2.
Okay.
They kept talking about being induced at 38 weeks, and so it just pushing back.
And did you end up getting induced, or did you go naturally at 40 plus 2?
I ended up being induced because he had no, was it 41 weeks? 41, sorry. And, yeah, there was no movement. There was nothing.
Terrifying.
My babies are very comfortable. And, again, he was measuring big, so all that fear-mongering about a big baby.
Yeah.
And they were big. Both were 4.1 and 4.2,
Wow.
which isn't technically a big baby, but for, they were measuring big, so all that, talk about the risk of that. So I was induced, but even with that, my midwives were talking about the way we could be, the way we induce. So it's less invasive.
Yeah.
Or we had options before we scale up. And they were on the phone. The really unfortunate thing that happened is it was during COVID. So the policy change within the public system a week before, meaning I couldn't bring my midwife in. So it was one support person.
Oh.
Yeah, a week prior. So, hey, oxytocin, totally shot. Yeah. And we had those conversations with my husband saying, Brad, let's just not assume it's you. Maybe we need to talk about whether it be the midwife and
that's the best.
what that means, and let's weigh it up. But the thing that got me over, I couldn't then live with him not being there, in future of missing that real moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, yeah.
That is a tough call.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Did you consider home birth at any point, Imren? Or?
I was aiming for a VBAC.
Okay.
Yeah. And I got my VBAC. And so for that reason, I wanted to be in the hospital.
Yeah.
And because I was high risk for those reasons of
okay.
the condition,
the
hospital. There was a lot of chatting through with Brad about his fears.
Yeah.
So I know I listened to Fiona's
I'm sorry, but the men and their fears, they need to go and read a book.
I'm like, it's not my job to get you over the line.
Yeah.
This is my decision. And our midwife was amazing, Kelly. She was amazing in saying, I can chat with him anytime. So they had multiple chats, and then he'd come back and go, I'm good.
Did anyone, through those 4 pregnancies, and the 2 losses, did anyone through any of those stages offer you any support to deal with those losses?
No. Even the second time of the loss, of being in the hospital system and it being really traumatic, and even the midwives and the nurses coming in and apologising because it was just a shamble.
Horrendous, yeah.
Nothing when I left. I got myself a mental health care plan and saw a psychologist after the first loss.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, not much out there, even when I had a look. There's some volunteer-run support. I was surprised, and also long wait lists.
That's the thing, there's so little out there, and then what is out there has a crazy long wait list.
Yeah.
And there's just not enough resources for people who need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about mothering through grief. So I know this is a big topic, and it's probably a bit of a trigger warning for people as well if they're listening that have experienced loss of a loved one close to them. But I know that when we first met, Imren, I didn't know anything about, your situation of your loss, and we went through that and we had a big cry, and, I listened to you and your story, and it was, I think, a really profound moment for me listening to that story and understanding a whole other side of mothering, because I had never experienced, and I would think that there is probably a lot of people, but also a lot of people that haven't experienced loss of someone so close to them while you're trying to mother in the early stages. So I really wanted to talk about this today on the podcast and get it out there, because I'm sure a lot of people experience it. but I don't think it's very talked about.
Yeah.
Start wherever you would like to start in.
I'll just preface with saying,
Yeah.
as a society, we don't really do hard stuff well.
No, we don't.
And so postpartum been my absolute gig because that's like the big transitions in life and the big moments in life. And for women, birth and postpartum are huge. And all that I talked about, and, you know, you talk about on this podcast about the isolation, that all of that is huge, and to be there for a woman through that. And then another layer that I learned with my own grief of losing my dad is like people just don't do these hard things well. Grief is not spoken about. It's not dealt with well. We really suck at it. We really suck at it completely. So I lost my dad last year, just over a year ago, and my children were 4 and 16 months old. My second was 16 months old.
And your dad was very, very involved in your life, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, you know, everyone has different relationships with their parents, but your dad was so present and so there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard for your children as well as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay. You take all the time you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Mothering through that would have been an incredibly difficult, and that's probably the greatest understatement ever.
Yeah. I have been so fortunate to have a father that was completely present. I mean, you know, I'll put aside all the childhood stuff, but authoritative and like, wait till your dad gets home.
Yeah.
He was, and the stress that they were under coming to this country as migrants, and he was such a determined man who was phenomenal in what he did in his life. So seeing his relationship with my children was just so blissful.
Yeah.
He was as a grandparent, he was the father he always wanted to be.
Yeah.
And he had never had that modeled to him. So he was breaking that lineage. You know, when we talk about our generation really breaking a lot of cycles, my parents did that.
Yeah.
He was the father he never had. And he was a grandfather that was just, I could not fault. Like, he would be there. He would come and just visit us sometimes and pop in. Or, my parents are really involved. It's all about their grandchildren. It's all about the family, as ethnics that came here and holding on to their strong values. And so their family is their life. They've given us everything. They've come here to give us a new life and a better life. So then to have, that relationship that he had with my children and all the grandkids was just so absolutely special. They were so present in their lives. I mean, they'd look after them and he'd feed them fruit at 10 o'clock. He was very very healthy. He'd peel the mandarins and feed them, break walnuts with them. So they've got these fond memories of like breaking walnuts and eating them together. He'd take them to the park then, put them to sleep, and then go do the groceries for my mum. So they were in this rhythm together.
Yeah.
They played a role together. And so they were very close. They were so close. My kids, especially my 4-year-old, like 5.5-year-old now, that was a whole process of not just being in my own grief. So I could not just feel my grief. It was also, what do I do as a mother to support my son through this? I don't know, and there's no textbook, there's no one there to guide, no wisdom. And all my supports were going through it. My mum, my sister, my brother, they were all in their own. So no aunties showing up. Like, it was just the shock of people not really being there in ways that mattered. I had a couple of dear friends, but when we talk about these are pivotal moments where your life really changes and some people just can't be part of it. So lots of friendships were lost. Lots of dynamics changed. There's so much to it. I was still exclusively breastfeeding my son.
Right.
And God, that was a dance in its own of not being available as much through that time and feeling the guilt of that.
Yeah, wow.
He was very much dependent on me to sleep, to do all those things. So that changed very quickly because it had to. And he was so like the bond with my dad, and like he was the last one. So they were just,
So close.
so close. So there was a lot to unpack. There was a lot that I needed to pause my grief and what I felt in order to parent through the day. Like the demands of being a mother don't stop.
No.
People weren't coming and saying, we're going to take over so you can be. I didn't have that. So I needed to parent, and then it'd come to like 9, 10 o'clock at night where I'd have a space to feel. The early days, and I've got this amazing, beautiful friend of mine, a dear friend, and I'd just call her at 3 or 4 in the morning in those early days where my dad was missing, and then when we found out, and I'd just call her at 3 because someone had to stay home. So Brad had to stay home with the kids. And I'd just call her and say, I can't. Can you come and walk with me? And she would.
Oh.
So we just walked the streets, and I could scream, I could feel it all. So there was a lot of holding until I had space, and then still showing up to kinder drop-offs, still showing up, getting calls from government to like it was a very unique, very different loss.
Yeah.
So there was a lot there.
It was sudden.
Like, Department of
Yeah.
Foreign Affairs calling me while I'm doing kinder drop-off.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so there was a lot that I hope no one needs to go through.
Yeah.
But still needing to parent, still needing to get dinner on the table, still needing to do all those things. And so I did take time off. I was working during that time. I took, I think, initially 6 weeks. Bereavement leave is 3 days.
You're kidding.
Regardless of who you lose. Yeah. 3 days. And so I thought, this is an absolute joke. My workplace was very understanding, but also when I was meant to return back after the 6 weeks, they gave me my full workload, like, here's your handover. And I just thought, is there no, there's the shock. And the thing is, I'd just returned back to work 4 months prior from maternity leave of having, that parental leave for a year. I'd been back for 4 months, and then this all happened. So I was just getting in the momentum of getting my head back into that space. And so I went back a little bit, and I just went, I can't do this. We need to make a decision that I matter and my mental health is important, and I just can't. It's too soon. I know. I'm not sitting on a fence with this. It's very clear to me it's not working. So I was able to take 6 months then. So pretty much most of that year I did not work, and I took time off as a doula as well. Yeah, which I needed. I absolutely needed. I needed time to say to myself, you have nothing on today. You can lie down in bed, and that's completely okay. I needed time to just go for a walk in nature. I needed time to be on the kitchen floor howling. Yeah. And that's yeah. And life's looking very different now, where there's a lot on and there's less time to really create space for that. But there's a whole piece about learning how to live with grief. And there's a lot of misconceptions about healing. I don't know, but I just feel like I'll never heal completely from this, that it's part of me. I accept that my grief is part of me, as my father will always be a part of me. So learning to live and hold that grief is a dance, and learning to parent through that. I'm triggered constantly, constantly. My son will, he'll just turn and say, "Do you remember Dede died? Where do you go when you die?" I mean, how do you answer these questions?
Yeah.
Friends will come over and he'll just ask them, "Do you know where you go when you die?"
Gosh.
And
they probably look at you going, "What do you want? What do you want me to say here?"
And they're beautiful. Like a friend here, a few weeks ago, and she said, "Do you want me to answer?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely."
Yeah.
And she gave her version, and we said everyone has different beliefs.
Versions, yeah.
And so, I was really, they were exposed to too much too soon of that significant loss.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to anyone going through a similar situation, Imren, or do you feel like it's just very individualized?
Yeah, it is pretty personable, but also I think there's so many overlaps with birth and death, really.
Yeah.
The passages of life. But as a doula, I see so much overlap in how we show up for someone after birth, show up for them after death or a big loss or grief. And I think there's a lot of awkwardness. Sometimes we can stand back and not know what to do or say, or feel like we're treading on toes, or do they really want?
Yeah, it's like that fear of doing the wrong thing makes us do nothing.
That's right. Yeah, and show up. Keep showing up. If someone says no, don't take offense.
Yeah.
If that might not be the right time, it may be later, or just drop something off, or let them know you're thinking of them. Because like postpartum, time goes by and it's not even that long, a few weeks, and it's old news to other people.
Yes.
And it's still so fresh for you and your family. And so, I just feel like it's so important to be that person if someone really matters to you. And the fact is, we're all going to go through it.
Yeah.
It's something we're all experience as long as we love someone dearly. That loss of that person in your life will hit us all one day. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Imren. I hope it has helped someone out there. It's a privilege to have you working in the space at home because of all the gentleness and softness and space holding that you offer. So, thank you again for being on today.
Thank you. Thank you.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.